Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Crew Room Conversations. 20th October is celebrated as a World ATC Day. For all those who do not know what ATC stands for, the full form is Air Traffic Control. And when I thought that in case I have to invite a good professional with an ATC background, the name undoubtedly that popped up in my mind is Wing Commander Ruhi Kushwa Bullar. So I'm extremely pleased and super excited to invite and welcome Ruhi on the show. Welcome, Ruhi.
Thank you so much, sir. And indeed, I'll begin with thanking you with all the gratitude from all the entire ATS fraternity to put it forth that you considered us a very integral and an important part of the air operations. And yes, air operations without us are incomplete.
I've known you for many years now, and just to introduce you to our audience, Ruhi has had various posting profiles. And last time when we spoke, just about a year back, you were on your last posting to Air Force Station Sirsa, where that was a fighter base. So hats off to you, Ruhi. I think in your 21 years of your career, you've been and have been exposed to all facets of operational flying. And surprisingly, as I remember, I don't think you have had a ground tenure. That means you have been in and around ATC all throughout. Am I right?
Absolutely correct, sir. 23 years, 4 months, and 7 days to be precise.
Okay.
And I'm proud to have been associated with the operations. And I loved each and every moment of my service. So I'm glad that I was a part of the ATC.
Excellent, excellent. So, Ruhi, just take us back onto the your commission, if I'm not wrong, in the year 1996. So how is it for an average ATC officer, the classical way for training? How does it start? And when do you get posted to an operational base?
So we were the first batch of women ATC officers to be inducted, and we got commissioned in 96 after undergoing our initial Adam and the basic military training, which we all undergo and earned our stripes of pilot officer. And then we have a professional course of 6 months in air traffic control officers training establishment, which is an Air Force Academy, Dundigal. So that is where the gamut of entire ATC, we begin by ATC. A to Z is taught to us there. And yes, 6 months is a rigorous period where full marks to all our instructors. I still remember we were a core strength of 23, which included 20 lady officers and 3 male officers.
Oh.
So, and this bunch number of was really overwhelming for everybody. You need to have a basic of science orientation, I would say, although the course was a mix of Bachelor of Arts, Bachelor of Commerce. There were some from home science stream as well.
Okay.
But I think our course did pretty well. And the credit will, of course, go to all the instructors there who started from the scratch. All of us did well. And in our service careers throughout also, I think we were the lead batch and the templates were set high.
Sure. Knowing you, I'm convinced of what you're saying. There is not an iota of anything less than truth in what you're saying. So interestingly, when I started to interact with the ATC long back, we used to go and fill up the flight plan and all that. And when I went actually deep into the subject matter of ATC, when I spent instructional tenure in Air Force Academy, and one of the most amazing things I need to tell everybody is that every ATC officer across, I don't know whether it's applicable for, I have a sense that lady officers would be doing very well in ATC. And the reason is they presumably are good listeners. And that's what I'm saying with the kind of this thing that any average male, at least in my mind, my wife always keeps telling me that I'm not a good listener. And when I look at any ATC officer, what happens is, and what I have seen is, you wear the headset, and on your right ear, you're talking and listening and maintaining the RT with the radar. And on your left one, you are monitoring the air traffic, which is in the vicinity of your circuit. So amazing amount of sense of balance, I would say. So definitely, Ruhi, I'm sure, you will agree with me that listening skills, so as to speak in corporate today, if somebody has to talk, you guys are doing a fantastic job all throughout. So from an average perspective, when we say air traffic control, what comes to anybody's mind is a tower. And on the tower, a lot of antennas. So could you give us in some kind of more information of what exactly is the overall scope of what we call as the air traffic control?
Absolutely, sir. I mean, multitasking comes naturally, I would say. But then, nonetheless, while in my service, no gender biases, of course. As far as we faced in the ATC, it was a good working environment where the seniors, our mentors, the full marks to them, our colleagues who tutored us and brought us up to this level. Your actual practical training commences on the field once you get posted to your bases, and that's where you start your live controlling. Until then it has been a simulator training. Yes, so once we reach our bases, that is where baptism by fire begins actually. So classically what I'll put it is that we are marshals to ensure safe skies. And the primary duty of course remains that no two aircraft goes into each other. So to explain in a very layman language, like you have your roads available with the traffic signals in any city system, you have airways up there. You have your airspace very clearly demarcated, where any traffic which is bound to cross your airspace, you would have the prior knowledge. They cannot commence climb and descent without your control, without your intervention. So that it's basically safe skies. Anybody has to fly, anybody has to transit. I'm supposed to be the person giving him a clearance to climb, clearance to descend. And on the ground, in case the aircraft is taxiing, I'm supposed to be aware about each and every obstruction so that my aircraft doesn't get into any obstruction with any aircraft or with any, maybe a hangar or maybe a tree. So I'm supposed to be fairly aware about what is the wingspan of the aircraft and what kind of aircraft operations are coming. Say any X aircraft just suddenly decides to land. So is he able to taxi on a particular taxiway? So fair knowledge about that, and maintaining a very smooth flow of air traffic.
So this is when we are talking of now smooth airflow. But I'm also conscious of the fact that another huge responsibility that lies with the person who's on the control at the RT is to maintain the emergency services. So what are these emergency services that come under your...
That's one of the most important aspects as well, where we are... you need to maintain a particular airport category so as to assist the aircraft operations should any emergency with the aircraft occur. My intervention should be within 2 minutes. My specialized fire tenders should be reaching there, and I should be in a position to extricate the people. And by within 3 minutes, the fire should be all put down, and you should be into the barging into the aircraft, taking, or depending on what kind of aircraft is there. It can be a single cockpit, it can be a double cockpit, it can be a big aircraft with. Besides the crew, you could have a multi-passenger system. So my evacuation system and towards that training is very, very important. So I have a whole team which assists me. In the tower, I would have an airman on watch, airman on lookout who will ensure there is no incursion on the runway. Everything is no bird, no nothing before I give a clearance to land to the aircraft. Then I have a team below as the ops clerk who's doing all the clearances, numbers, initiating a flight from place A to place B. His entire clearances have been obtained, the diversions, the weathers, the navigation aids. And my safety crew is the most important, morning to evening, they're there. It's a 365 days a year and 24/7 job. There is no Sunday or a Diwali or a Holi. There's a different situation. I need to maintain my watch hours. I maintain my watch hours.
Yeah, I agree with you because, one needs to be aware of this fact that if there's one helicopter or one aeroplane flying, or there could be multiple aeroplanes flying on various details, the amount of shift, if I was to call it that, in terms of your emergency and all remains same, because whether it's one aircraft or multiple aircraft, your readiness to combat any kind of contingency remains same. When there is less traffic, what you see a typical ATC officer on duty, the entire scene changes when there is traffic. And the person there on the tower would be just giving instructions. And if a newcomer comes to the tower, he would be surprised maybe at the kind of instructions that are so crisp and clearly passed to people. Emergency handling from a pilot's point of view is an extremely important part. So you rehearse the emergencies in your briefings, you say what is the article you're going to give the ATC and things like that. I'm sure that even the ATC officers and the entire crew practice their emergency. But in your career spanning more than 2 decades, any particular emergency that you quickly can recall and say, yes, that particular thing happened and your emotions that time, your experiences, any one of them?
Absolutely. Emergency handling is one of the most important. Flying and emergencies go hand in hand. Flying, they're bound to be incidents and accidents as well.
Sure.
So, to handle that in a most calm and composed manner, to be able to deliver your instructions crisp and clear, is one of the most important aspects. And of course, it comes with the nature of training. We do have a simulated training sessions as well as like the pilots undergo. Similarly, for the air traffic controllers also, emergency comes unannounced. You're not prepared for it then. So that is how it has to be. The way pilots practice it, so do the air traffic controllers, including the radar controllers.
Right.
Touchwood, I have been very fortunate in not having a very serious nature of emergency. But as a young controller, I remember with 3 years of service, my first emergency, major emergency, which happened was in Jamnagar, where we had a MiG-23 formation, 4 aircraft formation coming in for landing. And so everything was okay and no other traffic was in air. And classically, Jamnagar, you have a cross runway.
Right.
2406 and 3012. I still remember the runway designation. 3012 runway was more operational then, as runway 24 was used only for extreme emergency due to the nature of the old surface. So fair enough, the formations were landing and there was nothing unusual with the pilot had reported. And if I'm not mistaken, the call sign was porous. So I remember the pilot on final, since it was a formation landing, so you do give clearances and they're maintaining their own separation. So by the time the first the aircraft touches down and is reaching the end of the runway, the second aircraft is already landing. So this was the last aircraft to land, of course. And okay, he said they have 4 greens. So it's generally, the pilot had not given the call of greens till very late. So as a controller, you just say, okay, recheck. So for this particular category of aircraft, recheck 4 greens, clear to land was my call. The moment aircraft crossed the middle marker and he touched down his nose, the nose wheel collapsed.
Oh, okay.
And nose wheel collapsed. On the moment you see, the first thing is as the DATCO, you press the crash bell.
Okay.
So you have different, for a single crash bell, okay, you start and await further instructions. For 2, you continue moving, instructions will follow.
Okay.
So obviously when you've seen the crash bell pressed and the CFT crew immediately from that state of just being monitoring the RT, and they just come into the most alert phase. Since the aircraft was just passing, we saw him in, it was the wheel collapsed and you could see the sparks flying off. And so obviously everybody was, so the moment crash bell rings, it's a big sound. The moment any bell rings, so it says, okay, that's an emergency, and everybody, just rushes. And generally you do broadcast on Motorola that so-and-so emergency, so that all people who need to react for that a post-accident, the aircraft came to a halt just short of marker number 2 to go, meaning say a standard 9,000 feet of runway. Almost the aircraft was, so you still had 2,000 feet of runway remaining. At the 7,000 feet he was, and the SFS is saying, just come out of the aircraft and run. And the pilot, of course, unstrapped, did not even, the CFTs reached, but however, by that time, since anything could have happened.
Right.
The aircraft could have caught fire.
Sure.
And it could have been disastrous. But luckily, there was no fire. It was just the sparks which flew, and the pilot jumped out, and the safety and all applied the adequate media. And, by the time SASU and all reached, and thereafter the aircraft was towed. And of course, it takes, it's a close to half an hour exercise. And, you clean the runway, the DATCO goes for the runway inspection to see any metal pieces, any rubber pieces, or anything of the aircraft which could, hamper the air operations. So that was done up, cleaned up. But however, that shook me to see that aircraft land and the nose wheel collapse.
Nose wheel suddenly collapse, I'm sure.
Yes. And at that speed, yes. So
you're expecting a certain activity to go on. You're used to viewing that from the ATC tower. And now, as I'm visualizing it, you see something else happening, and your limbs are doing something else. You are giving some instructions. Your brain is working ahead of time. So amazing, kind of multitasking, if I was to call. In the another aspect which I have always very, very fond memories or friendships with ATC officer, and one I would like to kind of share with you also. This is something I'm talking from point of view of ownership. I was the flight commander in Udhampur, and that's in Jammu and Kashmir. And when you come from Srinagar, you cross a certain pass, Banial, and we had this officer called as Dinesh Yadav. I still remember the name. So one of my aircraft had taken off from Srinagar, and it had crossed the Banial Pass, and the weather was little bit marginal or getting bad in the bowl of Udhampur. And Dinesh Yadav just gave me a call and said, "Sir, aircraft को cross किए हुए, बनियाल cross किए हुए time हो गया है. I am sensing something bad weather or something like that." Now, the moment he said that, I just took my two-wheeler and I rushed to the ATC, which was about half a kilometer away. And I got onto the tower, I got onto the RT, and I asked the pilot, "How's the weather?" He said, "Sir, if I come normally, it's not possible. Weather is bad." So there was another alternate routing. I said, "Can you come through that valley?" He said, "No, sir." So I just gave him an executive instructions, go and land into a field. And when the weather clears, that's what a normal helicopter pilot is supposed to do. And he landed there after about half an hour. Weather cleared up, both the pilots came back. But what I complimented Dinesh, and I say it openly today, that the amazing amount of sense of ownership that he had. He was monitoring the traffic, not only getting airborne from Srinagar. In his own mind, he was calculating as to how much time it normally takes. The moment it did not take that much time, there was a certain amount of anxiety in him, which he did not hold on to himself. He quickly reached out to me. So we had a great interaction with the ATC officers all over. And my favorite has been to sit there and understand how you guys move those scripts on which you are able to actually visualize things. We need to learn so many things from ATC officers. So any such incidences where you thought that you were quick to adapt to the emerging situation, and like we say in the parlance of aviation, we always say this situational awareness. That means what is happening around me is extremely important for a pilot, and the same is the case for an ATC officer. So any thoughts on that, or any experiences that you can narrate?
Absolutely, sir. I would relate one, which when I was in Jammu, I had a fairly long tenure of 4 years and a month there, from 2006 to 2010 June. And so as a good ATC concept, your number of aircraft which get airborne safely, you expect all to land back safely. All pilots, after doing the mission, come back home, land safely, and get on with their lives. So this is one particular thing. I remember we were 1 week into the exercise. We had an exercise on, and it was the final day, the culmination, where 2 aircraft mission got airborne. And that was an ORT mission. Of course, you have your standard procedures. As a DATCO, you're aware at this point of time, he'll be asking for a lineup. This time he'll be getting airborne. Everything is pre-briefed to us, and the entire leg-wise timings from place A to place B, how he goes, and what will be his ETA back, so that you're tracking the aircraft. Because classically, not all aircraft are transponder equipped, and they're not all can be tracked and on the radar. And although there are certain blind spots as well, where you tend to lose even with the primary pickup. So I remember the mission got airborne safely, and you were expecting, and this was the last mission, I believe, and we expected that once they land back, you will be off guard for a while, and you would look forward to your weekend, which was coming over. It was a Friday. And so say somewhere 20 minutes of the flying time, and I get a call from the pilot of the number 1 aircraft stating that, "Ma'am, I've lost contact with number 2.
Okay.
So for a while, initially, yes, it was an instantaneous communication. The pilot spoke to me on my phone, and of course, I responded immediately. And so first thing is, of course, you start checking up with your neighboring radar units. Do they have any pickup? And the moment I called up the signal unit there, so the controller, they confirmed that, "Ma'am, it's a crash."
Oh, okay.
So obviously, for a moment, you do feel crash. Okay, the pilots are there with you. You know them day in and day out. You work together. You socialize together. It's a home away from home, where your relationships are beyond your office level as well. And that's how true bonding is all about in the military services. And for a moment, yes, I was taken back because I knew both the captain and the co-pilot very, very closely. But nonetheless, before we start taking our actions, I first called up my crew, which is my first chain of command, and then, of course, my station commander, where this thing had happened. And so, without wasting any time, you have the search and rescue helicopter would immediately get started up and all.
Yeah.
And so, fair enough, I remember one of the RPAs which was operating was the army unit also co-located there with us, and so that was the only aircraft which was available in the AOR at that time. It's a remotely piloted aircraft.
Right.
A drone in
Sure.
a parlance these days, yes.
Correct.
And the ops room, the officer were quick to comprehend, and they said, "Ma'am, where is the general location?" So I thought, "This is the general location, and in case, how much time will it take you to reach that particular area?" He said, "Ma'am, maximum around 10 to 15 minutes." I said, "Okay, just once reaching that site, just let us know." And by that time, things were already moving. The search and rescue helicopter also within 6 minutes the aircraft was airborne, which was a very, very record time for getting airborne.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
all the agencies had been alerted, and once that RPA reached on site, and it was already transmitting the pictures live, and it said, yes, it's a confirmed fatal. So that is when you realize, okay, so that is one mission in my entire service, that one aircraft did not come back and land, and that stays always heavy in your heart. But then, yes, at that point of time, you feel about the safety. You always feel that, yes, things are fine. Maybe they're not reachable. You never think that is the worst thing which has happened, unless and until, of course, it has been announced on the RT. Sometimes, yes, you do get a call, mayday, mayday, and sometimes ejection, sometimes. So this particular thing left. And then, of course, the next 15, 20 days was a colossal search and rescue, because their helicopter had gone deep into the river, and extricating the bodies was a very difficult thing. So I still remember every sixth day or so, we would have a funeral, and it's one of us who left.
I can sense that, because as an ATC officer, and I know the wonderful couple that you and Mullar, your husband has been a helicopter pilot, a great friend of mine, and I'm very, very sure that the kind of people we are in the armed forces, and especially in places where the ATC and all of us interact, it takes the person who receives the information actually has to keep his emotions tremendously under control and take the next step, because the next step is very important at that time. And it's only when this whole thing sinks into you, maybe a day or two, then you really, and I can sense that even after so many years, there is an emotional connect with those departed souls. So God bless those souls. And so that's the tough part of our life, Rui. I guess when we do these kind of missions, we are actually so well connected. Moving on, Rui, you said you are the first batch of women ATC officers, and then your last posting, interestingly, also, as you shared with me, was you were what is called as the senior air traffic control officer at a fighter base, right?
Yes, sir.
So that means to say you were in a position of, if I was to classically call, you were heading a sub department or a sub domain. So it was a leadership role, right? So any kind of thoughts, or in your 23 years, when you want to describe leadership, what would your thoughts be?
First of all, Air Force has been a wonderful platform, to put it very straightforward, where right from the start in our career, I do not think that I have personally come across any gender biases in terms of my working capabilities, in terms about the responsibilities which were given to me by my seniors, who had that vision and who had that courage of conviction, or who had faith, absolute faith, that, okay, once it is handed over to her, the job is done and it will be done well.
Right.
So maybe having grown up in that environment, you have to, of course, prove your professional mettle. That goes without saying, and that goes for anybody, X gender or a Y gender, doesn't. You're a professional. And Air Force has been a wonderful organization as far as this is concerned. It was an equal opportunity, equal platform given to all of us. And so, yes, definitely, at a particular seniority, when you're expected to take charge, my seniors, my organization thought it befitting that the baton should be handed over to me. And I think whatever was tutored or whatever I had seen my seniors, or by virtue of my training and my professional competence, it was a good experience. And as any leader, I'm supposed to be fully prepared to handle a particular ex-contingency with my entire men, material, resources towards the overall organization goal, of course.
Yeah.
So yes, subordinate development becomes a very important factor in that. One particular thing has been, you should always be doing whatever you do it your best and lead by example.
Oh.
This is one underlining factor which I always personally follow.
Okay.
That leading by example, there is no scope of ambiguity or leaving for your men, your women are placed under you, that okay, so and so has not performed. So if you're leading by example, I think things fall in place. I would like to also borrow from Field Marshal Chetwood, from armed forces background. So those lines of when I went to IMA for my brother's passing out, and reading those lines definitely had an impact, that the honor, safety, and welfare of your country comes first, always and every time. The men you command, their safety, welfare, and comfort comes next. Your own comfort and safety comes last, always and every time. So I think if you're able to handle that particular thing and lead by example, the challenges and the organizational goal everything will automatically fall into its place.
100%. Rui, I can make out your passion, your professional spirit. The conversation we had, I'm sure you are reliving your 23 years, and you have been one of the very passionate professional in the way you are explaining things. This could go long and long and long. And in the virtual space that we are, due to the pandemic, we can't really enjoy the chai and pakoda, which we could have maybe enjoyed during these conversations.
That was one crew room thing.
Yes, that's what the important part of a crew room is, where you just sit and you say, ghanti dabaiye, chai laiye, and you enjoy things and you just connect. So we've been great friends, and it not only my entire gratitude and gratefulness, of course, to you at a personal level, but all the ATC officers whom I have met. I am dedicating this particular episode to each and every air warrior who's working relentlessly so as to ensure that the operations of the Indian Air Force go in a safe manner. Amazing amount of ownership, amazing amount of camaraderie is displayed between the operational branch, that is the flying branch, and the ATC. So long live this kind of camaraderie. Thank you so much for joining. Thank you so much for joining me, Rui, and spending your time with us. And to the viewers, this was one amazing conversation with Wing Commander Rui Kuchwa Bhullar. And we hope to see you next time in another fortnight with some lovely conversations with few of the another air warriors who would have done some phenomenal amount of service in their service careers. So till then, stay tuned. Thank you and Jai Hind.